Hello everyone. Our topic this week was requested by all of these lovely people. We'll be going over the story of Arthas from the Warcraft franchise. Spoilers for all things Warcraft, WoW, etc.
Okay, first things first. The newest content update for WoW was scheduled to come out this last Tuesday, which will be after the recording of this video. On the off chance that information on Arthas has come to light in the last 4 days, it won't be here. We don't expect much, but more on that later. So, Arthas Menethil is one of the most iconic characters from the Warcraft franchise. He was the main hero for 2 campaigns in Warcraft 3. He's had books or comics written that include or star him. He was the major antagonist of one of WoW's most beloved expansions, and has had lasting impacts on the game since then, including many allusions and references to him, specifically in the most recent expansion. Unlike many powerful heroes or villains, Arthas was never meant for anything but greatness. In truth, he might have had to work harder to be mediocre than he actually did work to achieve the heights of power and glory he would reach in his lifetime. Born a human prince, Arthas would train to become a mighty paladin, only to eventually turn, fall to evil, and ascend as the Lich King, Lord of the Undead, in Warcraft's world of Azeroth. As a mortal, Arthas was almost everything you could want in a prince. He was intelligent, charming, strong, handsome, loyal, and kind, but he was also brash and arrogant, certain of his sense of justice and duty even when others disagreed with him, and absolutely dedicated to the cause of his home country, Lordaeron. When he turned evil, he became a dark mirror of himself, still intelligent, persuasive, and strong, but now also cold, calculating, cruel, and as time passed, increasingly powerful.
To explain the story of Arthas, we need to back up a bit to a time before he was born. In the distant past, a powerful rogue entity in the land of the afterlife commissioned 2 items, collectively known as the Vessels of Domination: the Helm of Domination and Frostmourne. The helm, also known as the crown or helm of the Lich King, was a magical helmet that gave the wearer the power to control undead on a tremendous scale. This control was absolute over mindless undead and nearly so for more powerful, intelligent undead. Frostmourne was a powerful magical sword that stole and captured the soul of the wielder, as well as the souls of any who were slain by the weapon, as well as granting the wielder the power to raise those it slew as undead. These items were then released into the living world with the intent of paving the way for this entity's plans for the land of the living. However, all those who claimed the Vessels of Domination, Arthas included, knowingly or not, rebelled against the entity, pursuing their own agendas instead. The Vessels of Domination came into the hands of the Burning Legion, demons intent on corrupting and destroying all of creation. As one of many plans to corrupt and consume Azeroth, the first Lich King had his soul entombed in a block of mystic ice, along with the helm and Frostmourne, and was hurled to Azeroth's surface. The demons planned for the Lich King to raise an army of undead in their name and pave the way for the mightiest of their numbers to walk the surface of Azeroth. But the Lich King knew that when the demons' plans came to fruition, they would have no more use for him, and so he quietly schemed on his own whilst outwardly pursuing the demons' agendas.
The Lich King worked these plans for years during which Arthas grew from a boy to a man. Arthas was born the crown prince of the kingdom of Lordaeron. In his youth, Arthas studied statecraft, the sword, and religion, including holy magic. He became close friends with the crown prince of another kingdom, Varian Rin, who would grow into one of the finest blade masters in the world, and the two often spent their free time dueling. At a young age, Arthas also met and befriended Jaina, who would go on to become one of the world's greatest archmages. As time passed, Arthas would be schooled in matters of swordsmanship by the brother of the king of the dwarves, and trained to be a paladin by one of the Paladin Order's founding members, Uther. At the age of 19, Arthas was officially inducted into the Order as a fully fledged paladin. Over the next 5 years, Arthas' duties as both a paladin and a prince would see him travel all over the world and rub shoulders with most of the big-named characters in the Warcraft verse. He began a romance with Jaina, but eventually called it off so that she could focus on her magical studies and he could dedicate himself to his kingdom. He fought enemies and monsters in the defense of his homeland, and he presided as one of the 4 paladins in judgment over the exile of one of their founding members, Tyrion. Tyrion was as honorable and decent as any paladin. Unfortunately, that very righteousness eventually caught him on the wrong side of politics. Lordaeron and its allies had just come off a series of wars in which one of their greatest foes had been orcs. The orcs had been conscripted to work for the demons, just as the Lich King's undead were, but orcish faces were still the pictures painted to frighten children at night. Tyrion had come across one such orc and found to his surprise that said orc was a man of honor and integrity. As such, Tyrion's own sense of righteousness had compelled him to defend this orc from his own people, even come to blows with some of the nation's soldiers in the orc's defense. Despite his honorable reasoning, between the fact that Tyrion had harmed loyal soldiers of the realm and in the defense of an orc no less, he was banished from the kingdom and the order, with Arthas surprised and heartbroken, but supporting the verdict.
Around the time Arthas was 24, Warcraft 3 begins, kicked off by the plans of the then-current Lich King. Whilst Arthas was in the midst of protecting some smaller towns from orc attacks, words reached him of an undead plague sweeping the countryside. Those slain by the undead would rise as undead shortly after, but more chillingly, it was a true plague, a disease that could be caught. Those who contracted the disease died quickly and rose almost immediately as ravenous zombies. Arthas was sent to investigate the source of this plague and put a stop to it if he could. Not only was he gifted and powerful, but as a paladin, he had both healing powers and an immunity to the plague, making him the perfect candidate to spearhead such an expedition. As Arthas pursued leads, he would be reunited with both Jaina and Uther once more. He and Jaina tentatively struck up a relationship again, while Uther proved a stabilizing light in those trying times. They tracked the plague to a town where kel'thuzad, a powerful necromancer in direct service to the Lich King, had made a base of operations. They then slew the necromancer, but realized he had already tainted and sent out numerous shipments of grain with the plague, such that any who ate it would shortly thereafter die and proceed to infect others. Knowing where the shipments were headed, they traveled in that direction, fighting off literal armies of undead along the way. As each day passed, Arthas grew more and more desperate. They had no way to kill the infected. Any that the undead slew rose up as more undead, making the plague very easily transferred, and the infection was following up not only the lands of his kingdom, but more importantly, its people before his very eyes.
So it was that by the time Arthas and the others reached their destination, the prince was becoming desperate. He'd rebuffed the warnings of a powerful prophet who'd counseled that he simply leave and take his countrymen away from here, or they'd do more harm than good. But Arthas was dead set on saving his people, no matter what he had to do. So when they arrived too late, finding that the grain had arrived and many, if not all of the citizens had already been eating it, Arthas made the call he thought was right. Took his first step across the line from reason over to madness. It was just a matter of time. Anyone who ate that grain would die, rise, and kill others. There was no way around it. Arthas ordered that everyone in the city be slaughtered and the entire place burned to the ground. Uther and Jaina were horrified and outright refused, saying they should wait, that even if a few people weren't infected, it was worth the danger of facing the undead to save them. Arthas held firm, however, and ordered his men to attack. Jaina, Uther, and most of his paladins would take no part in this, but could not contradict the words of the Crown Prince, and so simply left Arthas and his men to do their work. As Arthas put the city to the sword, leading from the front as he always had, he encountered a demon who claimed to be behind the plague. The two fought, but the demon escaped, taunting Arthas to seek him in Northrend, a frozen continent to the north, if he wished to finish things. Taking his men with him, Arthas pursued the demon, and, after weeks and months at sea, landed on the frozen tundra of Northrend, completely unaware that he'd stepped into the domain of the Lich King.
Shortly after arriving, Arthas encountered the dwarf who trained him in swordplay when he was younger. His old friend was on an expedition to find Frostmourne, having heard tales of a legendary blade, but unaware of the curse it held. Arthas was at first uninterested, but his opinion quickly changed as the situation turned desperate for them. Shortly after arriving, they received orders for Arthas and his men to return home. Combined those orders with how hard they were having to fight the undead, and his people began to pack up and leave, like they were ordered. Arthas, though, was fixated on catching and slaying the demon and putting a stop to the plague back home. He hired a group of local mercenaries to burn his soldiers' boats, preventing them from returning home. Then, in order to avoid mutiny, ratted out the mercs to his men, careful to avoid mention of his own involvement. The mercenaries were killed, and with no way home, his men were backed against a wall. They needed to win in order to either take enemy ships or have time to construct their own unmolested, so they fought, and fought hard. But here on their home turf, the undead's forces were nearly overwhelming. Seeking a trump card, Arthas and his dwarven ally went in search of Frostmourne, figuring that if it lived up to the legends, it could level the playing field. They found it hidden away in a cave where, unbeknownst to them, it had been placed by the Lich King in the hopes of finding a champion, someone exactly like Arthas. After all their work to get there, when they found Frostmourne, his dwarven friend was disappointed to realize it was a cursed weapon and counseled that they should simply go back, believing they had wasted their time. But Arthas swore that he'd suffer any curse for the sake of his homeland, and with those words, sealed his own fate. The blade was encrusted with ice, and here Arthas' proclamation broke free, the force of the explosion leaving Arthas' friend seemingly dead.
Arthas took up the weapon and discovered it did in fact live up to its name. As with Frostmourne in hand, he led the charge to not only push back his enemies, but ultimately slay the demon he'd come to kill. Much to the demon's surprise, since he knew the Lich King influenced anyone who wielded Frostmourne. But the Lich King had laid plans for his own survival and ascension without the demons, though few knew this, and Arthas himself wouldn't be clued in until much later. His enemy defeated, Arthas fled out into the snow, Frostmourne slowly eating away at his soul, while the Lich King spoke to him, influencing his mind. Until finally, Arthas re-emerged from the tundra sometime later as the very first Death Knight, an evil undead antithesis of the Paladins. He slew or converted every one of his soldiers, raising them up as undead, and then sailed home, now a champion of the very plague he'd sought so hard to eradicate. He received a hero's welcome and promptly killed his own father on his throne before unleashing the dead upon the capital and countryside at large, creating Undercity. Arthas slaughtered a pathway back to that town where he'd slain the necromancer kel'thuzad several months earlier. The plan was to revive Kel as a Lich, because he was one of the select few with the knowledge and power to be able to summon one of the Burning Legion's major demon lords to Azeroth. But it was a complicated affair. The combination of the power required to bring back someone of Kel's stature, the amount of time he'd been dead, and we'd argue the fact that he was pulverized with holy magic, meant that they'd need a powerful font of magic to enact the ritual, and Kel's remains wouldn't survive the journey. So, Arthas went searching for a magical urn to carry the necromancer's remains in to preserve them, only to find, after having slain many members of the upper echelons of the Paladin Order, most importantly and finally Uther himself, who profaned Arthas' name even as Frostmourne devoured the old Paladin's soul, that said urn was where they'd placed his father's ashes. But committed to darkness and evil at this point, Arthas didn't care. He stuck Kel inside the urn and headed off to the Elven lands to resurrect him, tearing through their kingdom as he had his own.
The two most important events from his carnage in Elven lands were the revivification of Kel as a Lich, and the fact that he slayed one of the Elven generals, Sylvanas, whom he then raised as a Banshee and one of his own lieutenants, partially to torture her for her resistance. Later, when the Lich King's power began to wane, she would turn on Arthas, whom she never stopped hating, but both would escape the encounter still unalive. Arthas' forces then sacked a major mage metropolis, where Kel would use the resources gathered by the mages to summon one of the Legion's major demon lords to the world. The demon lord promptly proclaimed the Lich King's services unnecessary and assumed direct control of Arthas' undead legions, though Arthas continued to play along as the loyal servant while secretly working for the Lich King directly. Over the course of the following campaigns, Arthas quietly worked to undermine the various demons who were made generals over the undead's forces, unable to strike them directly for fear of being discovered, but taking every opportunity to make their life harder, and even, when he encountered Illidan Stormrage, an elven demon hunter, helped empower Illidan so that he could kill the demons for him. For more info on Illidan, see our video on him here. Arthas' assistance eventually helped aid the final defeat of the major demon lord that he and Kel had helped summon, and after that, Arthas began more openly opposing the lesser demons, systematically retaking control of his legions until he received word from the Lich King that both the Lich King was being attacked and that his powers were waning as a result. When Arthas arrived back in Northrend, he found that Illidan, still bent on removing demon influence from the world, undead included, and also having had his life ruined by the power Arthas had helped him gain, had rallied a coalition of allies, including a not inconsiderable number of elves, seeking vengeance for the destruction Arthas had leveled upon their homeland, and pointed them at the Lich King.
Knowing he could never reach the Lich King before Illidan, with all of his enemies in the way, Arthas took the advice of one of the Lich King's agents, who guided Arthas through the dangerous subterranean ruins left behind by its own dead people, allowing Arthas to circumnavigate many of the dangers of the surface, but when he arrived at the Lich King's gates, he still had to throw down with Illidan. The two fought a final climactic battle, with Arthas just barely emerging victorious. Thereafter, Arthas made his way to the Lich King's Tomb of Ice, he shattered the prison, and donned the Helm of Domination, merging his consciousness with that of the previous Lich King, and becoming the new one. Over the following years, he would eventually move from sharing control to exerting dominance over the previous king and becoming the sole Lich King in truth. While he did so, he built his forces and formulated a plan, at this point fully free from the influences of the demons and running his own show. Eventually, he launched simultaneous attacks on the capitals of the major players across the world, with the primary intent of painting a target on his back big enough to attract the very mightiest of Azeroth's heroes. Because he wanted to do more than just conquer and destroy the nations of the world. He wanted to send the world's greatest heroes on a twisted approximation of his own journey. Arthas wanted to take the greatest heroes the world had to offer, kill them, raise them as powerful servants, and send them back to their own homelands to destroy them as he had done to his kingdom years before.
Among the great heroes that rose to that challenge was Tyrion, the very same paladin whom he'd helped exile when Arthas himself was a paladin in good standing all those years ago. In the process of preparing for this war, Arthas had physically cast his heart out of his body, feeling it weakened him, made him more human. Eventually, Tyrion and several of the world's greatest heroes, i.e. you the player, discovered where this heart was kept and sought it out. Tyrion believed at first that it was the key to redeeming Arthas, figuring that if such a powerful being of evil could be returned to the light, the world would be that much better off. However, upon arrival, Arthas, unconcerned, bid Tyrion gaze into his heart, and what he saw there convinced Tyrion that the Arthas he once knew was well and truly gone, that only the Lich King remained. So, he destroyed it, severely harming Arthas in the process, who promptly fled.
Later, Tyrion and the world's greatest heroes fought their way through the entirety of Arthas' forces to stand before the Lich King himself. Arthas froze Tyrion in place, forcing him to watch the battle between he and the heroes. Arthas was delighted, knowing that by having made it to him, the mortals here assembled truly represented the most powerful warriors Azeroth had to offer. As the battle raged on, Arthas killed each and every one of them, gloating to Tyrion that he would send them back to their homelands as his greatest generals. But at that point, Tyrion finally broke free from the ice and charged Arthas, successfully managing to shatter Frostmourne in the ensuing struggle. Released from Frostmourne's clutches, every soul that Arthas had ever taken rose up in a whirlwind to assault and restrain him, while the spirit of his own father resurrected all of the fallen heroes at Tyrion's side, who then quickly dispatched the Lich King with the aid of the spirits that had long been trapped within his blade. In his final moments, Frostmourne broken and the helm removed from his head, Arthas almost seemed to return to himself. As he lay dying in the ghostly embrace of the father he'd slain with his own hands, he could only remark that he only saw darkness, before fully passing on. Then, as his spirit slipped into the afterlife, the spirit of Uther, his once mentor, consumed with vengeance, took Arthas' soul and cast it into the Maw, a sort of torturous hell for the very worst souls ever to have lived. Uther would ultimately regret this decision, knowing he should have given Arthas the chance to atone there in the afterlife, but either way, that's the last we've seen of Arthas. The newest expansion has reminisced a lot upon his influence, and another young prince, the son of Varian, Arthas' childhood prince friend, has been forced along a similar path. Data mining and test realm experiences for the newly released content drop in WoW's current expansion have even revealed that said prince will appear as a raid boss with a few abilities and mechanics that are clear homages and references to Arthas' own raid boss fight. But as of the recording of this video, we have no idea if Arthas' appearance in the current expansion will go any further than that. Although, since you're living in the future now, maybe you know the answer already.
And that's basically the story of Arthas, Lich King of the WoWverse. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and share it with someone you know might like it. If you have ideas for videos you'd like to see in the future, do like all of these lovely people, and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you'd like to see our Let's Plays, follow the link in the description and subscribe to our Let's Play channel.
In the meantime, this has been True
Masters Morons, signing off.